So let's see how validation works in MVC6. Back at the project, we know that we're using this ASP-4 to specify what the name of the property on the model is when we define our form, but we'd like to be able to validate this on the client. But in order to validate it on the client, we also have to validate it on the server. Because you can spoof servers with bad information, you're going to want some sort of validation that can test it on both sides of the wire. Can test to see that they can't submit the form until it's complete, but also that when it comes across the wire later, that it is validated. And that's where data annotations can help us. Let's go over to our view model, and we've determined that all three of these are required to send a message. So we'll just use an attribute called required. And this is in the system.componentmodels.dataAnnotations namespace. So I'll bring in that namespace, and I'll use a little editor inheritance to make all three of these required. And required is a good start. But the data annotations also allows us to do certain things like string length. So we can specify min and max size of a string. We can also make sure that this is a proper email address by just annotating it with email. It'll do a regular expression check against the rules of email addresses to make sure this is a good email address. And here we can use string length again. And so we're telling the system that we have some rules about whether this is a valid message or not. Now, these aren't business rules. These aren't going to check complex operations to see whether it's valid. It's simply a quality check to make sure that all of the rules that we're defining here are true and valid for a view model. But we can take this information and share it using MVC6 with the client to do that validation. This is going to require us to do a couple of interesting things. The first thing is we need a couple of dependencies on the client. jQuery has extension projects called jQuery validation. And we're just going to use the 1.14 version, and we also want jQuery validation unobtrusive. And we'll see what unobtrusive means in a minute. These are two libraries we now have, but we want to include them on our page. And our view here, we could go ahead and put them on the bottom here, but because the way the page is rendered, it would end up loading them before it loaded jQuery. Let me show you why. In our layout, our scripts that loads jQuery and ultimately our site is happening after the render body. We'd end up getting the script tags we want here under render body way before the jQuery that they depend on is actually loaded. So how do we fix this? We can actually set up sections on the layout page that we can inject markup into. And we'll use this for code. I'm going to use the @render section, and this is where I'm going to give it the name of the section, which I'm going to call scripts, for lack of a better name. And then I'm going to tell it whether it's required. And I'm going to say false. Now, I certainly could have brought in my jQuery validation and unobtrusive here at the layout, but a lot of pages aren't going to need it. There's no reason to bring those scripts in if we're not going to use them. Instead, we're going to use this render section to inject them onto the layout page for us. So let's come back here to our contact page, and we'll use a @section declaration, and we're going to give it the name of scripts, and simply put some curly braces. So whatever is between these curly braces is going to be injected onto the page as scripts. So here we can just go ahead and put script with the correct source. We're going to get it from lib, jQuery validation, distribution, and then min. And I'll repeat this for the unobtrusive piece. The unobtrusive piece builds on top of jQuery validation to make sure all these things work correctly. And I'll include them in there as well. By including these scripts and using the data annotation attributes on the view model, what happens when we execute this, let's go ahead and refresh the page, is let's see what it actually rendered. This input for name now has a bunch of stuff with it. It's because it has added attributes to help us do the validation. We can see that there is now a data val required, a data val length max, length min, data val equals true to tell it that it needs data validation, all those individual pieces. And those are read by those scripts we saw a minute ago. So let's get rid of this for the moment, and let's try to press send message. So when we press send message with bad data in it, we're not seeing anything. And the reason for that is we haven't told ASP.NET how we want to show these errors. In order to show the errors, we actually have to include, which I will here, a tag helper for ASP validation 4. And I'll go ahead and say name there. And this will go ahead and show any validation errors based on the name. Let's go ahead and repeat that for email and for message. Additionally, we may have model level errors, errors that are about the object, not about individual properties, or it could be about multiple properties at once. And so there we can use another helper called validation summary, and we can tell it to only show in this summary model level, not property level, but model level errors. Let's see what this generates on our page. We try to do the send message now, we're getting the errors for what is wrong. The name field is required. So let's go ahead and put my name in. As I start to type in my name, we can see this change to the error, right? 3 characters is not enough to fulfill the minimum length of 5 and the maximum length of 255. Luckily, my name is just long enough. And as I start to type, I go from is required to is not a valid email address. We can see that it's still not a valid email address until we start typing the requisite pieces. And same thing happens there. So we're getting feedback about what is correct about the data that is about to be sent. And when we click that send message, we're able to correctly send, and it actually appends it here as query string parameters, which is just the default behavior. Instead of letting the form simply use query parameters to send it to the server, we're going to do it a different way by implementing POST and using model binding. Let's see what that looks like next.